Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Vladimir Mayakovsky's play Mystery Bouffe, an heroic, epic, and satiric portrayal of our epoch. So I'm reading the 1918 variant of this text, and this is a play that draws on the traditions of the Carnivalesque. The Carnivalesque basically is a kind of medieval genre or medieval style that inverts authority, that challenges sociocultural norms, that is very invested in the body, eating, drinking, sex, though there's no sex in Mayakovsky's play. But there's a lot of eating and drinking. And it involves these sort of challenges to the normal hierarchical structures of society. It involves stepping outside of social norms to critique them. It's also typically very comic, very funny in sort of slapstick and social commentary type ways. So this play starts with a catastrophe, some sort of global flood. It's not 100% clear exactly what it is that's going on. But we have, so we have two groups. Well, I'll talk about this in just a second. So we start with two Eskimos, a hunter and a fisherman. And they are encountered by a Frenchman, as you are when you live in the area where the Inuit live. The French are practically their neighbors. That's not true. I know geography. But, so this Frenchman shows up while this Inuit fisherman is going off to get some, basically going off to sort of warn people that the earth is leaking. So this Frenchman shows up. He's, by the way, Inuit is the proper term. Eskimo is, I think, no longer properly used. Just throwing that out there. I don't know that Eskimo is considered derogatory, but Inuit is definitely the proper. Anyway, so this Frenchman shows up, and he's like, Monsieur Eskimo, I've something terribly urgent to tell. A couple of minutes, please. The fisherman says, well? And the Frenchman says, it's like this. Today at home in Paris, I sat eating some truffles or whatever I had when I noticed something that irks that great hulk of Eiffels. The Boches, I thought, their doings began. This is 1918, right? So World War I is going on. When all of a sudden a noise began. Up to the roof I ran, around the house's carcass gyrating a waterless tide, halting life city-wide, swept block after block, inundating Paris, a nightmare of a sea sand shore, invisible waves their bass notes rear, while above and beneath and behind and before the dreadnoughts of buildings appear, and I hadn't even time to put my mind to it. Was it the Germans or not? So basically, what has happened is some sort of catastrophic flood, right? A deluge of some sort that is wiping out the world. And in addition to the Frenchman, we have an Abyssinian, who's would be Ethiopian today, an Indian, a Turk, a Russian, Chinese person, Persian, the Frenchman, an Australian and his wife, a Russian priest, a German officer, an Italian officer, an American, and a student. And together, So these various people come, and basically they all report that their countries are gone. They've been washed away. These people are the clean ones. This is how they're in the characters list. There's the clean ones and the unclean ones. The unclean ones are a chimney sweep, a lamplighter, a chauffeur, a seamstress, a miner, a carpenter, a farmhand, a servant, a shoemaker, a blacksmith, a baker, a laundress, and the two Inuit, the fisherman and the hunter. Now, this is really interesting because this is one of the places we get a kind of carnivalesque inversion, because normally terms like the clean ones and the unclean ones would seem to carry a moral judgment, right? Because we have these ethical conceptions of cleanliness and uncleanliness, right? Who is clean, who is unclean, what's treif and what's kosher, what's halal, what's not, etc., right? We have all of these sort of ethical precepts that identify cleanliness with goodness, holiness, positivity, etc., etc. Here, Mayakovsky is not talking about that at all, right? When he is talking about the Abyssinian Negus, the Indian Raja, the Turkish Pasha, the Russian merchant, the Chinese, the well-fed Persian, the fat Frenchman, the Australian with wife, the Russian priest, the German officer, the Italian officer, the American, and the student, he's talking about people who are literally clean, people who do not do manual labor. And so the unclean ones, the chimney sweep, the lamplighter, the chauffeur, the seamstress, the miner, the carpenter, the farmhand, the servant, the shoemaker, the blacksmith, the baker, the laundress, the fisherman, and the hunter, these are people who do physical work. So they are literally unclean because their labor has made them so. So we have that inversion of what we might at first think in terms of the distinction between the clean ones and the unclean ones. So that's interesting. It's also interesting that the first time the unclean one, so the two Inuit are there from the beginning of the play, but the first time when the rest of the unclean arrive, interestingly enough, the first thing that they say is said in unison. So together the unclean ones speak, because the Frenchman asks, "And you, who are all of you, of what nation?" And the unclean ones together say, "Over the world since creation, a vagrant folk, we've been used to roam. We aren't any kind of nation. Our work is our only home." At which point the clean ones declare in chorus, "Proletarians, proletarians, proletarians." So in the context of this global flood, what they decide to do, these survivors, is to build an ark. And initially, the clean ones want to leave behind the unclean ones. But the unclean ones very quickly point out the clean ones don't know how to build a ship, they don't have the skills, they don't have the ability, they don't have the knowledge, etc., etc. So it will be the unclean ones who build the ark, if it gets built at all. And so the clean ones are like, "Oh, yeah, guess you all can come." From there, on the ark, the unclean are, they're just sort of living their best post-apocalyptic disaster life. They're drinking vodka, they're having some rations, whatever it is. And the clean ones up on the deck plot to get their food. And so the basic plan becomes, we'll declare a new Tsar. They do this. They manage to sort of trap the unclean ones and basically say, "You now work for us. You're going to go get all the food and bring it to the Tsar, and the Tsar will distribute it amongst the people. Instead, the Tsar eats all the food. And so the social commentary is off and running, right? No, it's been off and running basically from the beginning. But this new Tsar, who I think is I want to say the Persian Pasha? It's either the Persian Pasha or the Indian Raja. I don't remember off the top of my head, and I'm not going to look it up. But basically, this one guy who has been proclaimed Tsar eats all the food, and then everybody is like, this is fucking unacceptable. So they fuck him overboard, and the clean ones declare a republic. And in that republic, the unclean ones will work at their physical tasks, including gathering food, etc., etc. The clean ones will do administrative labor. And so the unclean ones bring all of the rest of the food to be sort of cataloged by the clean ones, who eat the rest of the food. At which point the unclean ones chuck them overboard as well. So basically, the miner puts it really, really well, I think. He says, "Comrades, how do you like it? There used to be one mouth to munch, and now they munch our lunch in a bunch. The republics turned out to be the same, a 100-mouthed Tsar with another name." So we've got, again, this social critique of both the Tsar and the Tsarist system, but also of republicanism, right? This sort of traditionally liberal movement in which private property is protected even as a certain degree of political liberty is granted within a still hierarchical social system. You can tell this is an early Soviet play, right? And this is very much, like, you can see where this is leading. The freedom of the working class, represented by the unclean ones, cannot exist either under the Tsar or under a republican form of government. Something else is required. So the unclean ones decide that they are going to go in search of utopia, more or less. But they are specifically going to go in search of some place that is livable, if nothing else. And so they set off on this kind of metaphysical journey that, in a strange way, almost parodies Dante's Divine Comedy, of sort of moving through levels of existence, right? So, first, the unclean ones sort of clamber up, and they're sort of breaking through the layers towards heaven, through the cloud layers and whatnot. And the first thing that they encounter is hell. And Beelzebub and the devils are there, and they're like, "We're gonna roast you, we'll jab you with pitchforks and put you in frying pans." And the unclean ones are like, "Fucking who cares, man? Let us tell you about the shit we suffered back on Earth. Let's talk about fucking the gas attacks of World War I. Let's talk about machines that rip workers limb from limb. Let's talk about starvation. Let's talk about freezing cold temperatures. Let's talk about all this stuff." And the devils are like, "Whoa, no, okay, we can't handle this, right? This is, for us as devils, this is a step too far. Just get out of here." And so the unclean ones go on, and they go to heaven. They manage to, again, sort of burst their way through these clouds of whatever it is. They break through purgatory up to heaven. And they meet Methuselah and all of these different sort of angels and whatnot. And the unclean ones are like, "Finally, we can hang out, we can rest, we can get some food. Stuff is going to be good." And what they find is there's no chairs to sit in. Nobody can sit. There's no food to eat. It says here, Methuselah leads the unclean ones to a cloud table laden with cloud milk and cloud bread. So they're just eating clouds, water vapor, right? And so the workers, the unclean ones, are like, this is not what we want. We need actual food. We need stuff to do. We need a purpose. We're out of here. Heaven, you can suck an egg because we're gone. And so they keep going, and they're getting hungrier and hungrier, and they're getting more and more tired, etc., etc. And they finally get to this place that, interestingly enough, they cannot agree on what place it is. They identify it as a number of different cities, depending on where they're from and what kind of work they do. But what they come to realize is that it is a giant, basically uninhabited city in which they can build their own society. And when they start going into this city, they are met by a bunch of things. And things in this instance means like let's see what we got here. They're sort of listed out. There's a saw, there's a hammer, there's a needle, there's a book, there's stuff, there's machinery, right? Basically the kinds of things that are used in their trades. And they initially sort of confront these things, and they say, and basically the unclean ones make these accusations, right? Bread is going to be expensive. Machines will maim workers, etc., etc., these kinds of things. And all of the things together respond, and they say, forgive us, workers, forget your hurt. Slaves of the ruble of slave owners we were. They turned us into regular curs. We guarded their counters, heartless and soulless, bared fangs through the windows of shops and bars. The traders sent out their myriad feelers. Man-hatred pulsed through the hearts of bazaars. The revolution, holy laundress with soap, washed all muck from the face of the globe. For you, while you wandered about in the heights, the new-washed world dried and lit bright lights. Take all that belongs to you, take it, don't fear. Come on, worker, victor, come here. And so what they realize, what they come to understand at the conclusion of this play, is that without capital, without the bosses, without that profit motive, a communist utopia can be constructed, right? Like, it's not what ultimately is detrimental and creates these conditions on Earth that horrified the devils earlier in the play is the clean ones, right? The people who exploit the labor of the working class for their own benefit and do not care what harm, what damage is done in that process. And there's a little bit here that I really, really love. The workers are sort of making friends with their tools, right? The blacksmith says, I've waited too long, bring the hammer along. And the hammer says, here I am, come and take me, love, right? So they're these partnerships, these deep friendships with their tools. And the book, offended, says, and me? And all of them say, come to, it's enough we've done without grammar. Take your place, book, beside needle and hammer. And I really, really like that, in part because one of the things that, for all of the terrible things about really existing socialism in the Soviet Union, one thing that they did was they dramatically increased literacy rates. Right? In 1916, literacy rates in Russia, in Ukraine, in many of these places that would become Soviet republics, the literacy rates were incredibly low. And one of the programs that the Soviet Union implemented was a literacy program. This t-shirt says something to the effect of, knowledge will break the chains of slavery. And it really was a commitment in much the same way that gender equity was a commitment under really existing socialism. And they made these massive changes to the socio-cultural conditions of these societies very, very quickly and very, very arguably efficiently, compared to, say, the Western model, in which that progress took centuries, basically.